It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. You can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting, either if you go to my website, emailrevealer.com, or if you just email me directly at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. Our guest today is Lynn Crook, and she's written this book about the false memory syndrome. It's called False Memories, The Deception That Silenced Millions. You can find her at her website, lynncrook.com, and she's also on Facebook, Lynn, Lynncrook. Lynn Crook, are you there?
I am here, Ed. Thank you.
No, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. It's kind of a last-minute scheduling, and then we had to kind of adjust the time, so I really, really appreciate your flexibility. Before we get started, tell us about yourself. Who is Lynn Crook?
Well, I grew up in Washington State. I'm the oldest of 6 kids. My father was a doctor, and as a student, I fell in love with French. So I went to the University of Washington, majored in French, lived in France, and loved the language. And then I got involved in teaching high school, and I loved high school kids. So I got a master's degree in high school counseling, and eventually I ended up in a sexual assault center, where I learned a lot about sexual assault, and I started having panic attacks at work, and that's actually what resulted in this book, what happened to me at work.
Gotcha. Okay, so you didn't realize why you were going into this kind of career, counseling people in a sexual assault, but I guess looking back in hindsight, it was because of what happened to you as a child.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I just thought everyone was so brave, and I loved the job, and I had no idea that I was one of those too.
Okay, so you know what? Let's work this in reverse then. Okay, so you work in the sexual assault organization here, and you start having panic attacks. Is that what you said?
Yeah, I did.
And then
I thought all I needed was a vacation, so I took a vacation.
Where'd you go?
I went to California with my husband.
Okay.
To San Francisco. We had a great time. Great food there.
Yeah. Well, but I guess it didn't solve this issue with the panic attacks, right?
No, it didn't. No, I got back and I had one therapy session, and I went home and I thought, oh, okay. Well, and I assured myself it only happened once. But I didn't tell anyone because I was too embarrassed.
Now, that's interesting. Yeah, when you go into a therapy session and you just describe to the therapist, right away they can kind of tune in and figure out what happened right away from an outside vantage point, right?
I don't think so.
No? Okay.
How do you think that? If I tell them what happened, if I tell them that, say, my father did X, yeah, then they can get it right away. Gotcha.
Okay, because well, I don't want to get into too much detail, but it's just a certain situation where describing certain symptoms, then right away the therapist said, well, this is what happened. But now let's get into this here. So how did it go with you? The first session with the therapist, you remembered what happened or?
No, I didn't remember what happened. I just remembered that something happened during therapy, and I told the therapist something I'd never told anyone before, that it wasn't necessarily about sexual abuse.
Okay.
And I was confused, and I panicked, and I wanted to get out of that room as fast as possible because I think unconsciously I knew that I was about to tell. So I needed to get home, and that night, looking out at the rain falling down the nighttime window, I remembered something that happened in a shower, and I was shocked, and I immediately dismissed it as no big deal. But it was a big deal. And I think that what I did was to remember the easiest stuff at first. So,
so this was an incident in the shower with your father?
yeah, with my father.
Was there any participation with your mother as well, too?
Any what part? I think that my mother participated, but in the early days, I don't think she liked it.
Okay.
So she stopped and she just stayed out of the room. But she knew.
Okay.
Of course.
Okay, so you had this first revelation to yourself, but then when you kind of talked yourself out of it, is that what happened?
No, I just said I can't possibly tell anyone because it's too embarrassing. I don't want them to know this about me. And so my husband says it took me 3 months to tell him, but I'm sure it didn't take that long. And maybe I hope it took just a couple of weeks because I couldn't tell him because I thought he would leave me if he found out that my father had molested me. Yeah, I thought so.
And what year was this? Because it's a different world now. What year was this? This is like in the 80s, right?
This was in 1989, February.
Yes, and it's a whole different world now. Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Now, so 1989, okay, and even then. So finally, what happens next? You're talking to your husband, now he knows. Now what happens next?
Then, as I remember more, I tell my siblings, and we meet. We decide to meet in Seattle, and we all share what we remembered. And I wish that all survivors could do that, because if you get your siblings to talk about beforehand, before they talk to the molester, that they're a lot more open about it. So my case was corroborated. I had someone who always remembered. I had someone who remembered partial stuff. And eventually in 1991, I decided to sue for damages.
Now, this first meeting with your siblings, did they remember right away? Were they holding back, or their memory also had to be jogged, or?
They remembered.
So they were living with this the whole time. They never forgot.
Yeah, they never forgot. Like one sister who always remembered, it was acts, but she didn't know that it was sexual abuse. It was just something that she had always known that Dad had done. But no one told her it was sexual abuse. No one told her it was a crime.
Really? In 1989, she didn't realize that this was abnormal, unnatural, that this was considered taboo, forbidden? Really? That's fascinating.
No, it's amazing.
Yeah,
it is. And she's a nurse.
Well, and wait a second. In 1989, nurses were mandatory reporters back in 1989, weren't they?
Teachers were nurses, probably. Yeah.
Probably, yes. Right. So how could she not have? You know what? She probably didn't get trained. There probably was no training. You know.
No.
You know. Oh my.
And besides, she stuck it away. Like you store something, like in a file cabinet. You know it's there, but you just never need it.
Right.
And that's where she put it, so she never had to think about it.
Yeah, plus there's all kinds of normal psychological reactions to trauma, that cause us to want to forget and cause us to seal these things away. Because otherwise we'd be living with trauma 24 hours a day. We couldn't function.
And you know that the thing that people forget is that this sexual abuse, it happens to children. And it's easy for children to stash things away, to store information, to archive information. And I really didn't know that until I had grandchildren and saw how easily they forgot things. So my father is telling me, I will send you to the crazy house if you tell anyone. I was not going to tell anyone, and I was doing everything I could to stay silent.
That's right. When I was reading the media kit you sent over, you said that you were trained as a child to forget.
Yeah.
Can you describe that?
Yeah. Afterwards, my father would say, now just forget it. Tell yourself, forget it. So I would tell myself, forget it. And if I remembered, Dad would just say, forget it. And it was a hypnotic technique. So that each time I thought about it, I would forget it. And eventually I forgot it.
I tell you, you got to be so careful doing shows like this because the other side is listening too. You know what I mean? And picking up new techniques and new. I'm sure they are. You know what I mean? And I sometimes too. I'm sure there's things I won't talk about because I know that they're getting like a thrill from it. You know, like I know they're out there, man. So now,
of course they are.
Yeah, I know. It's just. So now you and your family. Okay.
Okay, we know that 1 out of 4 girls and 1 out of 11 boys were molested as children. Those are CC numbers. And if you figure that out, that's 48 million adults in the U.S. were molested as children. It's amazing. It's incredible. It's unbelievable. And if that many are molested, you know that there are child molesters out there. And they want to be able to molest without getting caught. So they're looking for tips, of course.
Yeah. It is. It's incredible. Because these are the kind of cases I handle. These are the kind of cases we do. These the majority of them. And whenever I meet somebody new and I mention what I do, either they stand right there and confess right in front of me, it happened to them, or they'll tell me about a friend or a relative that happened to them. So this is like almost every day I hear these stories. It's just talk about trauma. False memory is the deception that silenced millions. So now you and your family decide you're going to take legal action against your parents. Now, most people, and I deal with this all day long, most people in that situation say, well, we have no evidence. We have no proof. What are we going to do? Did you have any of your relatives, your siblings tell you that?
No, because we all met. And I found that as I was a therapist treating clients, that if I talked to them long enough, there was always evidence. I could always find it. But often people don't know what the evidence is.
I
so
totally
they think they don't have any.
I totally agree with you, man. If you think you have, if this happened to you, don't talk yourself out of it, man. And definitely approach an attorney. So now, how did you? The family said, well, did your parents have a lot of money? First of all,
they had to. Otherwise, the attorney wouldn't have taken the case. Yeah, they had some equity because he was a doctor.
Okay, there you go. Okay, so
if he hadn't any money, if he didn't have any money, I wouldn't have been able to sue.
I know that's another tragic thing too, because that's even more common. The person who molested me, they have nothing, and they're living on the trailer. That's even So that's important for the audience to know. That's true. Unless the other side has some money. Really, no one's going to take on the case because there's no motivation for the. It's
right. It makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. That's just the cold hard facts of life, in a capitalist system, anyway. Under capitalism, okay, where we put the profit margin, everything here, medical, Okay, so you guys decided to go to court, and then. How did you confront your parents before you decided to go to court, or did you just go straight to court?
I confronted my parents separately. I asked my mother out to lunch. I didn't confront her. I just told her what I had remembered.
Right.
And the first thing she said was, I believe you. And then she went on to say what she did remember. And she said some odd things that probably showed her as in denial. And I didn't want to believe what she was saying. And about 3 months later, I finally did. She knew. I didn't think she knew when I confronted her, but she knew. Yeah. And with my father, I brought him into a therapy room, and I confronted him, and I was really nervous and scared. And so I wrote everything down on a piece of paper. And after I read I say this in the book, after I read each incident, I looked at him, and I'm sure that number 7, he remembered that one. But at the end, he said, I don't remember any of that. I don't remember anything.
Okay, so
but he did.
He never made any admissions, though?
No, he never did.
I've also found that people that have survived these kind of traumas in their life, especially the women, will forgive other abusers for the rest of their life. They get sucked into these kind of abusive relationships over and over and over again, and they forgive their abusers for anything that they do. Did you or any of your siblings experience something like that?
I talked a lot about forgiveness in therapy, and what I came up with was it's not my duty to forgive my parents because of the sin that they committed. I'm leaving that up to God.
Gotcha.
And what forgiveness, that's between them and God.
Okay, so then what happens when you approach your parents with the lawsuit? Now, you sued both your parents, your mother and your father?
Yes. Because my mother, she didn't stop it. So then, by that time, we weren't talking. And